You're listening to Dodge Movie Podcast. Your hosts are Christi and Mike Dodge, the founders of Dodge Media Productions. We produce films and podcasts, so this is a podcast about films. Join them as they share their passion for filmmaking.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the Dodge Movie Podcast. This week, the film The Guilt Trip. I wrote down To Guilt Trip, which maybe that's what a lot of Jewish mothers are intending.
Not a little bit of guilt, to guilt. The Guilt Trip is another Jewish film. Thank you.
That was good.
I liked it.
This film came out in 2012, and it is directed by Anne Fletcher. Yay, female directors. And it stars Seth Rogan, Barbara Streisand, Kathy Najimy. Small role for Adam Scott and Colin Hanks, but they're there. It was produced by Lorne Michaels and Evan Goldberg. I believe that's a longtime friend of Seth's.
Evan Goldberg is. I don't know how Seth feels about Lorne.
And written by Dan Fogelman, who is also brings us This Is Us, Tangled, and Cars.
Yeah, you were a little bit on Cars, which is odd, but I like Tangled. Good work.
And it was based on a road trip that he actually took with his mother, Joyce, from New Jersey to Las Vegas. And he just wrote down stories along the way. And so this film is dedicated to her.
That's probably the only way for a filmmaker, writer, creative type to survive a cross-country road trip with a neurotic mother.
Is to keep a log.
Yeah, story ideas.
The synopsis of this film is his inventor, Andy Brewster, is about to embark on a road trip of a lifetime. A quick stop at his mom's house turns into an unexpected cross-country voyage with her along for the ride. And the tagline is, get ready for one mother of a road trip.
You know, I have to say that I think inventor is maybe a little off as a term there because we see him more as a chemist than an inventor, I think, in the film. But if we were to remake this now, they would spend a week quarantined in a hotel waiting for their 30 minutes on Shark Tank. That's how that would play out.
Oh, I like that. So, Mike, get us started with your pickup line.
Are you there? It's a voicemail message line from Barbara Streisand's character of Joyce, if I recall correctly.
Yes, Joyce.
And she's talking to her son. And that is not only great of Are You There? A mother asks about her son, who's obviously, as we learn throughout the film, not really been there for her. They are somewhat estranged. They're having a hard time. But also those voicemails done in voiceover, so obviously they could have looped them later, from her establishes her relationship with her son very, very well. There's nothing in there specifically expositional, but it shows you exactly the kind of relationship they have.
Yeah, I wrote down it totally sets off. It's a series of voicemails that she leaves, which kind of plays to how obsessive she is and how, a little overbearing. But I loved one of them. She goes, "Honey, it's mommy." Which tells you a lot right there because she still sees him as a child and she's treating him somewhat as if she's a child, still caretaking, still talking to him about what she's done for him in that, like, I bought you socks and underwear and, all these different.
Which is why instead of calling the boys honey, I call him bro chacho.
It sets up and it shows us their relationship right there. And I think also he is not listening to him. It's like delete. So that's how he views her, is just this kind of annoying fly that he just has to keep batting away.
I thought when they started out, he literally slept through her messages, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, pretty much ignoring him.
They're showing us right away. Again, that's why this first line bit is brilliant on my part. But they're showing us right away what we're in for, right? Mm-hmm. They're showing us the story. And so one of the things you hear about in storytelling, writing and filmmaking, etc., is drop them into the middle of the story, start in the middle of the story. And that, I think, is really hard to do. We spend a lot of time building exposition as a writer, and you want to share this brilliant work with people. But well done, it just immediately, you pick that point that shows the viewer exactly what they're in for and they're right. And that is well done here. Good filmmaking. I tip of the cap to Fletcher on that one.
Yeah, and then the scene continues. She picks him up at the airport, takes him home, talks about what she's made for dinner. She's invited like 3 or 4 of her friends over, which the last thing you want after a long cross-country plane flight is to have to kind of entertain, because that's what all of our parents want us to do. Like, dazzle my friends with your new science, invention.
I don't know if I could say 100%. I think my birth mother didn't want me to entertain anybody. She didn't want me around. So kind of embarrassed, Put on the burlap potato sack again.
So a version of that.
But I can see how other people might have that right. desire to perform.
And he's like, oh, I don't know, Mom. I'm kind of tired. And she's like, but I've cooked a lot of like, it's all about her.
She uses guilt to manipulate him. Right. It's right in the title.
Right. And so then cut to them around the table with all of her friends and the whole time she's saying stuff and he's saying stuff under his breath, it just showcases how much she's not listening to him. She doesn't listen to a thing. She has her vision. Right.
And so
yeah, they don't. You're right.
We see not until the midpoint of the film, which is a classic midpoint, very dramatic scene, do they start listening to each other.
Yeah.
So that's the growth arc for both of those characters. I will say there's a really funny line in there when he first comes to her house. And again, it tells us a lot in one line. He says, "You got more frogs since Thanksgiving." So if you go through,
she collects frogs,
you can see she got more frogs. So this established this is a pattern. And there's a lot, which there is. Set dressing went crazy. They purchased every frog-related tchotchke in the area. But since Thanksgiving. So that gives us 2 key points of information. One is he hasn't been there since Thanksgiving.
Right.
He doesn't visit.
Right.
And the other is this is a time period where he's talking about a rate of frog acquisition. So it's like, oh dear, this is going up.
Yes. So she tells him that something that's been weighing on her heart that she feels she needs to share with him. And she shares that there was right before she met his father, there was a young man who she met and fell in love with. And you can tell she probably would have liked to have married him. But then she met Andy's father. She told this boy, hey, somebody's asked me to marry him. And he pretty much said, yeah, then go marry him.
Good luck with that.
Not what she wanted to hear, but she loved him so much and he meant so much to her that's when Andy finds out that he was named after this, kind of unrequited love.
Right. And there's a great line in there I love. It was a trampy year for Mommy.
Yes. Yeah.
She had a couple guys at the same time. Wow.
So curious, he looks up this gentleman and finds out that he is living in San Francisco and he's embarking on this cross-country trip where he is going to stop at major retailers to try to sell his new clean cleaner, kind of a non-toxic cleaner, let's say.
I don't know how they did it, but they got a bunch of big name companies to actually be on screen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. They're Orchard Supply and
Ace Hardware, Costco, Kmart,
yeah.
HSN. Big name.
Yeah, big names. So he decides that, Mom, why don't you come with me? And they're going to end the trip in San Francisco. And at that point, did you get that he was doing it for him or he was doing it for her?
I never really got a read on that because I think if it was just for him, he wouldn't have said anything to her.
I agree. And then, later in the film when they're in Las Vegas and she's kind of like, I'm just going to stay here and then fly home. He seems upset. So it seemed like the reason that he put up with his mom through the whole trip is he eventually wanted to kind of almost like bring them back together.
Right. Because he mentioned several times throughout the film that she hadn't dated since his father died.
Right. And so that's the plan. So that sets off the road trip.
So yeah, he has this maybe not unhealthy, but this definite strong desire to see his mother return to dating.
Well, don't you think if she has somebody to occupy her time, she will bother me less?
Good thinking.
Because she was incessant.
And so good set design in her house on the nightstand next to her bed. There's a photo of her and her son. Right. Instead of like her and her deceased husband or other things, it was her and her son. He was right next to the bed.
Yeah.
So it showed that her life orbited around him. And there's a recurring gag where she talks to one of her friends about him all the time, which, as I think both a child and a parent, you would recognize that, right? I will not say which of my children has gotten a nickname of a famous actor or which actor it is, but I apparently talk in that actor's voice enough to my friends about him that that's the nickname now.
Yes. I thought this was really well written, and you could tell from the perspective of, I wonder, Dan has to have kids, especially based on This Is Us. I think he understands that parent role.
Yeah, well, if he went on a trip with his mother, he's been on the receiving end of it.
Right. And so what I was going to say is I paused this. I'm responsible for one pause. It's catching because now I'm pausing more than he is. I paused at 49 minutes because they were fighting in the hotel room and I could see both characters' points of view. I could see from the son who just wants to be seen as a grown man. He doesn't want to be treated like a child anymore. He wants to be an adult and be autonomous and he wants to be heard. But I also, from her perspective, when she was like, listen, you little shit. And I listened to an interview and Dan Fogelman said, there's that moment when you realize that your parent was a human being before they were your parent. Like, I think I'm
waiting for that to happen with my kids.
Yeah, exactly. You go, oh, they had dreams and desires and, passions and things that they cared about and things outside of me. And they're just trying their best. I mean, I think we expect our parents to be perfect and to do everything, to make all the right decisions and to raise us the right way. And when you go, oh, they were dealing with their childhood too. Or, oh, they were trying to, just balance the budget. Or they were trying to live in the 60s. It's just kind of when you realize like, oh, they had other issues that they were juggling in addition to raising me.
Sure, and I think that's true for most parents. I think, though, to be fair to some of our listeners, there are some parents who were hideously bad at the job beyond any sort of compassion or grace period. Yeah. But for the most part, I think having children of your own gives you an insight into how difficult it is. Mm-hmm. And you begin to see how hard it is to see your children as adults. Mm-hmm. Right. And so we see that with her, right? She goes through, she calls him honey and she's trying to, lick her thumb and do his hair before one of the pitches.
One of my favorite lines is, honey, take one of my books in the bathroom if you need to make.
Yes, need to make. Right.
And he's a grown man.
And there's this great line where she says, I was just trying to help. And he says, you always are.
Oh, I wrote that down too.
Yeah,
that was
a good one.
That was, oof.
By the way, at this dramatic scene, the midpoint where they have this argument in the hotel room in Las Vegas, and we start to see them first actually listening to each other, they do use their one F-bomb. And they have Barbara Streisand, of all people, use the F word. And I have no idea how they got her to do this film, but boy, that was a moment.
It was over a year pursuing her before she did it. And her son was recovering from back surgery and she would not do it without his blessing. And so while he was laid up, so maybe some good drugs are responsible, but I'm adding that wasn't in my trivia, but he read the script while he was laid up and gave her the thumbs up.
I think a lot of actors probably have scripts they agreed to do because of good drugs.
Right. Sorry, that was just me inputting, like full disclosure.
Not saying anything about Barbara Streisand.
Or
her son.
Her son. I can't remember his first name, but he's Elliot Gould's son. So,
Although
Mr. Gould.
Seth Rogen is fairly famous with his weed, so we can't really.
Right. So not only that, but then it was cute because Dan said that his mom was a huge Barbara Streisand fan. And so she unfortunately passed away before the film was made. She knew they were working on it, but maybe she knows. In the Universal type way, she knows that Barbara portrayed her.
It's obvious that cinematographer Oliver Stapleton also loved Barbara Streisand because throughout this film, she is lit beautifully.
I bet you that's in her contract.
Well,
knowing her, that's in her contract.
I've heard that John Travolta is very particular and will call up cinematographers and talk about it. But in this case, she definitely used whatever juice she could get. Not that she's not an attractive woman, but you can tell from the lighting that they put a little extra effort into it. And one of the things that caught my eye, even though we didn't pause for it, that I recall, is the illogical catch lights. She has gorgeous catch lights in all kinds of scenes, including when Seth Rogen is sitting right next to her without any catch lights at all.
Yeah, but you could see him in her eyes, as you have taught me. There were 4 separate lights on her.
Yeah, they worked real hard.
Yeah.
And paid off.
Was it Elizabeth Taylor who had, if you hired her, you had to hire her lighting person?
It may have been, I forget who it was, but I have heard that there was an actress
of that era who, in her contract, you had to hire her lighting person, which, what a great gig to get.
Right. If I was going to be on screen, I would certainly have that as well as my makeup person. I would want to control who is putting the makeup on.
Totally off topic, everybody. Sally Field only does her own makeup.
that is vintage. Way to go, Sally.
Yeah.
Right.
And she looks great.
She does a great job. I didn't know.
I know.
Fantastic. Shout out to her.
When we talk about show, don't tell, another little small nod that I thought was a nice touch is early in the film, she's wearing a UCLA t-shirt and he is flying from LA. So that pretty much told us, and we find out later, that he went to UCLA. And so I thought that was good because moms, you know, and it wasn't like the mom of a UCLA Bruin, but I was like, oh, I bet you he went to UCLA. So good job, costume department, for that.
I even took it as that was one of his college t-shirts that she took from him and was wearing.
Oh yeah, I could see that because it was kind of like worn, the printing.
And she was enmeshed with him.
Yes. Was there anything else in costuming that you noticed?
I did. It's not explicitly stated throughout the film that they're Jewish, but both Seth and Barbara are famously Jewish. And I noticed that the costumers put them, at least originally, in a lot of blue, and there's some golden lighting. And so blue and gold are common colors in Jewish culture. Mm-hmm. So I thought that was kind of a nice touch, as well as then we go throughout the film. Then she starts to branch out and she wears some different things. And he's pretty much in the same style of clothes throughout the whole film, kind of schlubby chic. But you see her, and there's this gag about all the luggage she takes. Well, she brought a lot of outfits to be ready, which again makes sense.
I thought, just a little note on the acting, Seth did a great job of being kind of like the nerdy, hyper obsessed with the chemistry and how like emulsifying, and he was impressed by his own product and not realizing that you have to play to the people you're pitching to. And she even has a line like, make it more of a show. And ultimately, like you said while we were watching it, she's gonna be right. Like all of the suggestions that she was making to him, which I think that also plays into the child parent role, because you hate it anytime they're right. But of course, chances are your parents are going to be right because they've done the exact same thing.
Right. So as a person who has worked with a lot of engineers over a lot of years, I think that captured perfectly that person who knows the technology, who knows the science, who knows the chemistry, but is having a hard time communicating it. So, you know, you don't sell the steak, you sell the sizzle. And that's what he's struggling. And she's trying to help him with that.
And then at the end, when he takes her suggestion, it actually is the one pitch that goes successful, that, you know, goes well for him.
Right. And because she had a good point, but he made it his own.
Yeah.
And landed it.
Yeah. How about a driving review?
So early on in the film, there's an opportunity for them to get bonus points with me because for about 30 seconds, they're going to drive a Dodge Durango on this entire road trip.
I know.
And then her character convinces him to get this clown car. It's a Chevy Aveo. It's a tiny little economy car, compact car, and it's okay. I will say she has some poor driving skills because there's a point there where she's fishing around in the backseat while at the controls. And again, kids don't do that. Eyes on the road, hands on the wheel. That was not very good on her part. I'm not sure about the whole ice in the wheel well bit. That seemed a little bit off to me. So it set up a great scene where a stripper is a good mechanic. So that's a funny bit.
It was a funny gag. I've seen like that happen, but over time, it happened so fast.
Yeah, that was kind of the thing, and only to one
wheel
of the four wheels. So it's a little bit off. But I have to give them really strong credit. So one of the things that I pay attention to, including time codes on digital video cameras, is the cars in the background in a driving scene. And it's a continuity thing. I also watch extras that walk past it if you're a sidewalk scene. But there's a scene mid to later part of the film where they're driving along, and it caught my eye that there is a semi-truck in the background closing on them at a pretty good clip. So I like that because it was showing they're driving too damn slow. But then I'm watching the entire time. It comes up and then it eventually passes them. And so as they cut from character to character and they intercut, it's consistent. And obviously it was on a green screen, but credit to the editor who went through and who actually made that semi-catching and passing them seamless. Good work.
Good work. I will put the editor's name in the show notes because he deserves a shout out.
Definitely so. That was
or
really
she.
Well done.
Could be a she.
Often it's a she, I think,
know.
Right?
I know. How dare I?
Yeah, right. The future is female.
Should we go to the numbers?
Let's.
The budget for this film was $40 million, and I'm sorry to say that they just barely broke even. It made most of its money here domestically at $37.1 and worldwide for $41.9 million. But I read in the trivia that it was supposed to be a 4-airplane only. And I had never heard of that. I learned in film school that there is a track that movies go on. Like first they're released in the theater. Mm-hmm. And then I can't remember if it's hotels first or airplanes first, but they, they're pretty close together. Right. Like they are released there. And then they're released, like an HBO, a streaming service, although all of this has probably changed in the last year. But then they used to be released on streaming services, and then they would be released a little bit wider or then like broadcast television. So I knew that there was kind of like a route that movies took, but I never knew that a film was 4-airplane only.
Makes no sense to me. Why would you pay for Barbra Streisand and not put it in a theater?
Exactly.
Yeah. Now, when I read that, it was from Seth Rogen on Doug Loves Movies. And I don't know if there's two people who are more famous for getting baked, so it's possible that was maybe not
it was
strictly
even a
accurate.
Joke,
could have been.
Yeah,
they're both funny people and stoners. So take it.
All right. That makes more sense, actually.
Yeah.
It's an hour and a half long. It's rated PG-13. It's listed as a comedy drama. IMDb score 5.7, and Rotten Tomatoes, it was considered rotten at 37%. I don't think I would call it rotten.
I wouldn't. My first viewing, I ranked it a 6 out of 10. I actually gave it a higher score on my second viewing. So it's possible that this is one of those films where it takes a little bit, right?
Yeah, I would agree. I think 7's a good number.
Yeah.
I'd give it a 7.
Film.
Yeah.
Speaking of Doug Loves Movies, I return to something Leonard Maltin said on a Doug Loves Movies podcast, is that most films are good. They're not great. They're not bad. They're just good. And this is a good film. I think everybody in it did a great job. It maybe didn't take off like everybody wanted it to, but it's a fine film.
Right. I was going to mention, I was curious. So this did actually take place in LA, New York, New Mexico, Las Vegas, Memphis, and the Grand Canyon, which I thought was funny because the scene where they are at the Grand Canyon easily could have been done green screen. So I think it's funny that they sent, a whole unit, when they send, that's not just like a cameraman and Seth and Barbara. I mean, that would be a whole production unit being sent to the Grand Canyon, and it was literally a 2 to 3 minute scene.
If that, I still don't think Seth and Barbara were there. I think they were standing in a parking lot in Burbank, and I think the second unit actually got the footage and they green screened them in as necessary. But the shots where we see of them giving dialogue, you'll note that it's just a medium. There's nothing to identify, and I think that was at Burbank.
Absolutely makes total sense. All right, everybody, that'll do it for this episode of the Dodge Movie Podcast. Please rate, review, subscribe, give us some love. Tell a friend if you know a movie lover in your life. Tell them about the podcast. Hit us up on all our socials. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, and let us know what you think. Suggest a film, tell us what you're watching, and join us next month for wedding films, because June is the month of love and weddings.
Dodges never stop, and neither do the movies.
Thanks for listening to Dodge Movie Podcast with Christi and Mike Dodge of Dodge Media Productions. To find out more about this podcast and what we do, go to dodgemediaproductions.com. Subscribe, share, leave a comment, and tell us what we should watch next. Dodges never stop, and neither do the movies.